Good evening and welcome to tonight's event, the 2022 Wingate Prize in association with JW3. My name is Michaela Brunberg and I'm the Head of Arts and Culture at JW3. Here we showcase the very best of Jewish arts and culture in the UK and across the globe. And our programme of talks, lectures, music, theatre and film forges connections and encounter within the Jewish community and far, far beyond. Our programme happens in our state-of-the-art building in North London, and you can find some of these, like tonight's event, online also. It's a real privilege to be part of tonight's event. The Wingate Prize is now in its 45th year, and it is the highlight of the Jewish literary calendar in the UK. We have a lineup of literary luminaries tonight joining us from across the globe. And in a moment, I'll hand over to our host, Emily Casriel. Emily is a journalist who leads the flagship Share Your Story for the BBC Centenary this year, and also the BBC Crossing Divides season. She previously created The Forum, the flagship weekly interdisciplinary radio discussion show. And in this capacity, she's also a trustee of the Wingate Foundation. So over to you, Emily Casriel.
Thank you so very much, Michaela, and delighted to welcome everyone this evening from London, Manchester, Paris and Tel Aviv. Of course, though, it's morning if you happen to be tuning in from California and afternoon in New York. I'm really sorry that we're not together in person at JW3, but of course they're compensations for a virtual life, because we've got, as Michaela said, quite an international gathering today. I'm privileged to be joined by our shortlisted authors, Edmund de Waal, Nicole Krauss, Wendy Lower, Anna Sieber, Rabbi Arthur Green, we're hoping the technicals will work, and Nir Bar-Am and his translator Jessica Cohen, as well as the chair of the judges. And tonight we're having a special discussion on the theme of empathy in the Wingate Prize shortlisted books. And you can see the shortlisted books on my bookshelf here. And I should say they're not in order of anything, don't read anything, they're in order of size. And of course, later this evening, we'll be announcing the Wingate 2022 prize. And for all of those joining us here this evening or afternoon or morning, you're going to be entered into a draw. And you will hear, because I've got an envelope here, if you're going to win all these shortlisted books. So stay tuned, because then you'll know which one you might want to read first. First of all, though, let's hear from the authors to tell you a bit about their books.
And my book, Letters to Commando, has been shortlisted for the wonderful Wingate Prize. I couldn't be more honoured to be amongst such a stellar group of fellow writers. My book is about the Commando family, a Jewish family from Constantinople who come to Paris and make themselves French. It's about assimilation and belonging.
Shalom, my name is Arthur Green. My friends call me Art. I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, where I arrived 2 weeks ago. And my book is called Judaism for the World. It's a collection of essays about issues of Jewish faith and life in the 21st century. I have been working for the past 50 or more years to hammer out a contemporary neo-Hasidic Jewish theology. I'm delighted to be considered for this prize.
My name is Wendy Lower. I'm the John K. Roth Professor of History at Claremont McKenna College in California in USA. And I am the author of The Ravine. The Ravine is a book about a photograph that was taken, an atrocity photograph that was taken on October 13th, 1941, what we refer to today as the Holocaust by bullets. Every image of genocide is a warning to us of how far ideologies of hate such as racism and anti-Semitism can go. Thank you so much for including me on the short list.
Hi, my name is Nicole Krauss, and my book is called To Be a Man. It's a collection of short stories. They're about men and women and about the arising tensions between them and in all relationships. The stories are set in our contemporary moment, but they move from New York to Switzerland to Japan, from Los Angeles to South America to Tel Aviv. I am very honored to be shortlisted for the Wingate Prize.
My name is Eshkol Nevo. I'm an Israeli writer, and my book is The Last Interview. It's about a writer who gets a questionnaire from a website, the kind of questions that writers often get. But instead of answering the politically correct answers, he decides to be brutally honest. In that way, we discover his life. He's in a kind of a crisis.
My name is Nir Bar'am, and my novel At Night's End is a story of 30 years of friendship. Yoel committed suicide when he was 35, and after his death, Yonatan wants to understand what happened to his best friend. In a way, the book is an investigation of the roots of the friendship. They loved each other, betrayed each other, lied to each other, and believed in each other in the same passion. And this book mainly deals with friendship, loss, love, but most of all of literature and the power of literature.
Hello, my name is Anne Seba, and my book, Ethel Rosenberg, A Cold War Tragedy, is about an obscure American Jewish housewife who was electrocuted for conspiracy to commit espionage with no firm evidence against her. I am really thrilled and honoured that the story of Ethel Rosenberg has been shortlisted for the 2022 Wingate Prize. I just feel so privileged to be Ethel's storyteller.
So, who got to choose which books made it onto the shortlist? This year, the chair of the panel is Rabbi Joseph Dweck. He's the senior rabbi at the Spanish and Portuguese Sephardi community here in the United Kingdom. Gemma Wayne is the author of 3 novels, and she's also a journalist. MJ Hyland is a multi-award-winning novelist and a short story writer and an editor. And Stephen Bush is the political editor of The New Statesman and a columnist for the Financial Times. So, this evening, I'm going to be going through the shortlist book by book, hopefully with the authors to talk about them. And the theme of empathy, it feels quite pertinent right now, because at a time of just coming through the pandemic, which has revealed our common humanity and many shared feelings, even though we've had so many different experiences of living through COVID. And if you've read any of these books and you want to contribute thoughts or questions on this empathy theme, please just use the text box at the bottom of your screen and I'll get to see them and I'll keep an eye on that and bring them into the conversation. And it will be really great if you felt like doing that. So first of all, we're going to be talking about Ethel Rosenberg, An American Tragedy, with its author, Anne Seba. And I'm delighted to be joined by Anne.
Hello.
Great. Technology works. Fantastic. Now, you've written such an extraordinarily gripping tale and the tragic ending, which we all know. And yet, through this painstaking research, you bring its central character, Ethel, to life. And all this research and the way that you convey it through your writing, it encourages us to feel a huge degree of empathy for Ethel. And I feel to understand the texture of her life and the choices that she made. For example, the details of her poor upbringing in the Lower East Side in Manhattan, her oppressive mother who thwarted her ambitions and to go to college, her tough, isolated life in the Second World War with a difficult child and a bad back. And I'm wondering, did you begin the book by feeling this empathy for Ethel, or did it grow as you conducted the research?
Oh, thank you for those kind words. Well, I have to say it grew because I think it's really important for a biographer to start with an open mind. I didn't really know what I would find, but I just felt that 70 years after her brutal death, it was time to restore her humanity, precisely as you say. She had her voice so gruesomely cut short. She was so young. She was only 37 when she was electrocuted after 2 years in solitary confinement. How can one not feel that empathy? But of course I didn't know, because I had to do my research, and I didn't want just to tell a story because I felt sorry for her. But of course that grew, because I feel once you understand who she was and what she was doing, and that she was electrocuted without any evidence, it's just impossible not to feel that empathy.
And how important for you, Anne, was Ethel's role as a woman, a daughter, a wife, to the way that you engaged and told her story?
Well, I suppose I first came across her story when I was a young mother in New York through reading E.L. Doctorow, the Book of Daniel. So I can empathize with that. But I do think you also need to step back. However, what I wanted to do was to tell Ethel's story. Those people who do know the story think of it as a spy story. They know the appallingly corrupt trial, and they think of the Rosenbergs, those spies. I've lost track of the number of people who just parrot that phrase, but actually Ethel was an individual woman, and I really wanted to tell the story of how difficult it was to be a housewife in the 50s, when there was so much misogyny, to say nothing of anti-Semitism and anti-communism. It was this terrible toxic stew, but the misogyny of the role that was expected of Ethel, the fact that she was accused of being a ringleader merely because she was 2.5 years older than her husband, for absolutely no better reason. Yes, all of that misogyny is very vivid.
There's actually a question that's come through on the chat, which was asking to ask you if you were able to speak to Ethel and Julius's children, their sons, as part of your research.
Well, that's really interesting, because when I started the book, I didn't want it to be authorized. I felt that I needed that distance. And the two sons, who everyone calls the boys, because they were 10 and 6 when their parents were electrocuted, of course, they're now in their 70s. I think they wanted it too. They've been so exploited by all the plays and films and books that they must have thought, who on earth is this English woman? How can she possibly understand Ethel? So we kept our distance, although I did meet them 2 or 3 times before lockdown. And I was very grateful, because they gave me an introduction to the child psychotherapist who had looked after Michael. I rushed to meet her because she was 96. I clearly didn't need to rush. She's still alive at 100, and she lives in California. So there were those sort of introductions, and to someone who was in prison with Ethel, and all of that informed my understanding deeply, deeply. Then there was lockdown, and I went away and wrote the book, and I was in isolation at that point. So I've really only got to know Ethel's 2 sons, Michael and Robbie, after the book was published.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Anne. I'm very, very grateful. So I am now going to be talking about The Ravine by Wendy Lower. And great to see you here, Wendy. Now,
Great to be here.
The centrality of your book is really about one photograph. And you write in the book, this book is about the potential of discovery that exists if we dare look closer. And through this extraordinary forensic research, you discover and share with us a single story of a single family in the moments of being killed in a ravine in what is now Ukraine. And for me, what made the book so unique was the way that you investigated, exposed, explained, combined with empathy and compassion for the family to restore these victims as being subjects rather than the objects of history. And I would like you to share with us a little bit more about this motivation.
Thank you. Yes, when I first saw that photograph, and I'm not sure if you can actually share it with the audience at some point in our little exchange here, but the image is so horrific as far as the fate of that family, and knowing that so little was documented in these killing fields in Ukraine, and 1 out of 4 victims of the Holocaust resided in what is the borders of Ukraine today, which we hope those will not change. And so it was important for me to try to recover those lost victims that haven't been registered. Many of them were children. You can see this little boy here in the center of the photograph. And sadly, he's probably not, he's going to fall into that pit. We know because the photographer took another picture of them in the pit. And I felt like in my teaching and in my scholarship that images like these were often used without any kind of caption or any close analysis of who is there to restore their stories and their lives. This is not how they wanted to be portrayed. It's horrific enough to be murdered with your loved ones, with your family members, but then to have someone take your picture at that moment, that added humiliation and denigration. And so that was really my focus for many years, is to try to find that family. We read so many names out on commemoration days. We talk about 6 million, but what about the lost families?
And this forensic reading of this particular image of this family allows you to unpack so much about what happened to them in their final moments. And perhaps you could just point to 1 or 2 details and clues in that you write so beautifully in your book about this image that we can all perhaps, see and imagine more than we might at first glance see in this picture.
Yeah, sure. A lot of it has been informed by developments in the scholarship on the Holocaust that are very interdisciplinary, whether scholars are working on the environmental history and the topography. So you can look there at the landscape that the Nazis are using nature. They're putting nature to work, whether it was ravines or rivers or, in this case, or swamps. I mean, Himmler was ordering that the Jews be driven into the swamps. So that was important. It's in broad daylight, which raises all kinds of questions about witnesses and the local community. This is someone's hometown. It's their hometown. Those Ukrainians were calling out the victims by name. They were their neighbors. The Germans just swooped into town and carried out this action very quickly, didn't speak the same language as those Ukrainian killers, and yet they're sharing in this kind of anti-Semitic hate. They're shoulder to shoulder. It's a vivid image of collaboration, of intimate violence. And even when we look at the smoke in the center, the photographer deliberately composed this and cropped it in a way, kind of following the rule of thirds. And so we are focused on that image of the mother and the child. And when we zoom in with the advent of technology, we can see there's another child slipping from that woman's lap. And in the foreground, those empty shoes, which speak to us as far as the role, the image of the shoe as the lost life and the absence of presence, and how shoes are used in the world of musicology as well. That could have been the father or a relative, we're not really sure. And even below those shoes, you can see bullet casings, the litter of mass murder. So, as I studied the photograph and kind of picked it apart, I wanted to pull out these themes, whether it's the family, collaboration, the use of nature, the witnesses in these small towns, and the missing represented by those shoes and that crumpled coat.
Thank you so very much, Wendy. Thank you. So the next book that we're going to talk about is To Be a Man by Nicole Krauss.
Hi.
Great to have you with us, Nicole. Now, To Be a Man is a collection of short, sharply observed stories published over the course of your career. And they're all beautifully and elegantly told with a sort of detached coolness. And if it's okay, we're just going to take one story, I Am Asleep and My Heart is Awake. And in it, we've got our protagonist, who's a New Yorker. And on her father's death, she inherits his Tel Aviv apartment and visits it for the first time. And you write, it was as if I was looking at my father's life upside down. This was his real home. And the apartment I'd grown up in was merely the place he had stayed in when away from here. So I'm wondering about this closeness that this woman had felt for her father, and then the realization that perhaps this wasn't the real father that she knew.
Right. Well, I think there's something that happens after a person who's close to us dies, in which we begin to see them in a different light. And the beginning of that light comes because their life is now complete. right? And so it's no longer happening and becoming. We see it as a whole that has an end. And so they become strange to us in a way, right, with that beginning or that end. But I think there's something else that happens to a lot of people, especially when their parents die, when they begin to go through their things. And we know so many stories where we actually, children find out that their parents had other lives, quite literally, other marriages or other children that were lost. And so in this case, I think, I was playing with that idea of what do we find out, or how do we see our parents in this ever-changing light as we grow older and then they finally die. And so this character discovers this whole apartment that somehow seems truer or more authentically her father than where they lived. And she goes to inhabit it, to kind of be with him in a sense after his passing.
And I was wondering about the title from Song of Songs, I am asleep, but my heart is awake. And I'm wondering, while she'd been asleep to her father's real life, on some level in her heart, she knew all along.
I was thinking, I love that. I love when readers bring their wonderful interpretations to the pieces, and I think it makes every story or every novel richer. But I think I was really thinking about a period of mourning. What does a period of mourning mean when, to some degree, our hearts couldn't be more awake to that grief and that suffering, and yet it is a period of sleep in some way. Something happens to us. We have to slowly put some part of ourselves to sleep while we keep another part of ourselves, our love for that person, alive. And it's a balancing act. And so there's a strange thing that happens in the story. It's a very realistic story in some ways, right? But in other ways, it has elements of invention, real invention to it, because there's a lot of sleeping that happens, sleeping that kind of grows on itself and into some representation of what that period of mourning means in that period between being alive and dying and being, in the Jewish religion, that period is very tender. It's a very sensitive period. Even if we're not talking about the soul, what happens in that period in which a dead body or a person passing has to be accompanied until they finally depart completely.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Nicole. So we're now going to be talking about At Night's End with Nir Baram.
Hi.
Nir, welcome. Hi, hello.
Thank you.
And early on in the little film that we saw, we heard you sum up your book about being an investigation into the roots of a passionate friendship between Jonathan and his friend Yoel, who committed suicide. And through the book, Jonathan remembers this shared adolescence which they had together in an effort to understand. And I'm wondering what prompted you, Nir, to delve deep to understand this empathetic friendship?
Well, basically, it was also a personal story. It began with a personal story that my best friend committed suicide in 2014. And basically, in order to write this book, I couldn't really write, an autobiography about our friendship, but had to use imagination, because in all my books, it's a very, very powerful tool. So I wanted to investigate the meaning of this friendship and this symbiotic tendency they had to build the world together, to believe in the world that they are building, to always be inside some kind of story. And when they go out from this imaginary world to the reality, then begins all the problem. So basically, it came from a very personal story, but also it was an investigation that I was trying to make for a long time.
And why did you choose to focus on this period of adolescence? Was it because it was there that their shared storytelling that they invented together in the playground was developed?
Well, basically, the book deals with 3 periods: when they are children, adolescents, and older. So basically, I wanted to create this kingdom that both of them shared, and it was like a place that they could really avoid society, avoid the neighborhood, avoid their parents, and just be together. And then, in some point, they have to get out. They have to get out to the world. They have to get out to other people. They have to get out to the army. And I thought that adolescence was the time when they stayed in this kingdom, but also had to start to look out. So, I think basically the story of a friend who tried to understand what happened to his best friend, to someone that he knew all his life, and then became stranger to him when he was 35. And I think it's a very a sobering experience to understand that your best friend, someone you knew all your life, basically was foreign to you, was a bit foreign to you.
Yeah, it's really a really interesting relationship. And I'm delighted to also have with us Jessica Cohen, who's the translator of this book. And she's translated so many Israeli books, and in fact was a joint winner of the Man Booker International Prize for translating David Grossman's work, A Horse Walks into a Bar. So what I was wondering about, Jessica, when you are translating, and we're talking around the theme of empathy, do you feel you're getting into the mind of the characters or the author?
Both, I would say. I mean, I think it's sort of, I feel that translation is a kind of channeling of the author's voice, but often, that voice is a narrator who may or may not be really the author. And, since we're talking about empathy, there is a lot of empathy that I feel I need to feel, towards the book itself and towards the author and that voice that he or she uses. So there's all these levels of, who I'm actually representing. Is it the characters or the author? But it's some combination of them all.
And I'm wondering in this book, which the key relationships are primarily male, although the key, also has the illness of his mother, which we're dealing with. And I'm wondering about how you as a woman, whether this is something that you can get in the mind of any character, or there was more consideration or thought as you were translating this book?
I mean, I think it's true that in this novel, and I think everything that Neil has written tends to have a strong male presence, but also, as you mentioned, the character of the mother is very much present throughout this whole book, as a sort of shadow almost that hovers over the protagonist the whole time. For me, it's part of my job to, in the way that a writer will write characters that maybe not don't share their same identity. As a translator, that's what I do as well. And I don't necessarily feel that I have a harder time relating to the male characters as long as they are well written, which they are in, fortunately, most of the books I translate. So I don't see that as a problem. It's just yet another sort of hurdle that I have to jump over to get to the character's voice.
Also, we came from the same neighborhood. This is important.
Okay. So that helps. So you get the neighborhood, you get the playgrounds, you get the context. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so very much, Neil and Jessica. So we're now going to be talking about the last interview with Eshkol Nevo. And welcome, Eshkol.
Hi, it's been fascinating to listen to everybody. I feel like reading all the books.
Oh, that's just the idea. Well, hopefully you will, and everybody watching will want to read the books too, all of them. Now, Eshkol, you have a conceit and structure for this novel that you mentioned earlier, and it's about this author who gives brutally honest answers to the typical kind of questions that people often fill in as authors about, what do you like? What are your characters? Except he doesn't answer in that typical way, but goes deep and deeper and honestly into revealing an extraordinary story, which it feels like there's a closeness. It has overlapping identities of you as an author. And I'm wondering, there are these layers. We were talking about layers earlier in the book of translation. And here we've got layers between you, the writer, you, the author in the book. And I'm wondering whether there's a confusion you would like, and how you relate to the writer in the book.
Well, I'm playing this game. It started as quite an autobiographical book, but then I couldn't resist the temptation to imagine, to think what could have happened, what might have happened. And in the end, it became another fiction book of mine. Still, the writer resembles me in many ways. And I could use my experience as a writer, understanding the soul of being a writer, and also book touring, like real life experiences of being a writer.
And you also focus on a number of key relationships through what is in fact a novel. And one of them is with his wife, the writer's wife, who the writer really loves. And then she throws him out the house after he confesses to an affair. Another key relationship is with an almost suffocating love that the writer has for his daughter. And he even goes to spy on her in her boarding school with some night vision glasses so he can find out what's going on. And for you, and there's also, of course, his best friend who is ill in hospital, dying. So were you thinking about the reader's perception as they entered your world through these, what began as very short answers and then increasingly unfolded?
It developed. I really it began as it was a writer's block in another book, and then I started playing this game of questions and answers, and then slowly I realized I'm writing a novel, and there are relationships. And the interesting story about you were talking about the daughter. One of the promises I made to myself is not writing about my real daughters. So I invented this very surreal story about the daughter wanting to go to a boarding school, which was completely out of context, not really happening in my own life. And the book was published in Israel 2018. 2019, my real daughter comes to us and tells us that she wants to go to this same boarding school that is mentioned in the book, and she hasn't read the book. So, in this strange connection between biography, fiction, I guess the book is about this in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah, you must be worried about some of the elements in the book. We won't give them all away to make sure they don't unfold in your life. But thank you very, very much, Eshkol. And now we're going to be talking about Judaism for the World with Arthur Green. And we're really sorry that technical problems prevent him taking part in this discussion, but instead delighted to be joined by the chair of the judges, Rabbi Joseph Dweck. Good to see you, Joe.
Likewise.
And this book is a really beautiful collection. It's a myriad of essays and insights drawn from a lifetime of learning and teaching. And the rabbi draws on a range of sources from the Torah to more mystical texts. And the book is divided into sections. And one of the sections is about the year. And I wanted to explore the chapter Shabbat, which kicks off the Torah. And in it, he writes that human life is inconceivable without Shabbat. And he argues this is because Judaism is a religion conceived by a nation of liberated slaves. And therefore, the importance in Judaism of understanding the needs of strangers, the needs of the poor, and indeed the needs of the land, everyone and everything that needs to rest. So I was wondering, from your perspective and from your reading of the book, of Arthur's book, is on the importance of this empathy for others that's at the heart of Shabbat and in its turn at the heart of Judaism.
Yeah, I mean, I respond with the greatest of respect and even trepidation to the great author, and I can say that from my perspective, without question, I mean, he does point out beautifully in the chapter that those slaves, right, that nation of slaves that essentially are the progenitors of the Jewish people, never forgot that they were slaves, and this religion that is developed through them comes through that lens always. And so, I mean, we see this really throughout the Torah, where the Torah will say, "Be very careful with the stranger. You were strangers in a land that wasn't yours. Be very careful with the even Egyptians." Right? The Torah says, "Be careful with Egyptians. You were a stranger in a land that wasn't theirs, and they harbored you." So there's always a prompt to see oneself in the place of others in their suffering. And so he in a lovely way presents Shabbat that way, that the need for the rest and replenishings and so on.
And do you think it's different because Jews don't have to empathize with the other? We're talking about slaves or the dispossessed, because they have been or are being the other.
Well, I mean, I think that to a degree, that's true. I mean, we've gone through, unfortunately, our own share in over 3,000 years of hardship and suffering, but it always allows for greater empathy. I mean, we do have a personal reference of it, yeah, as a people, but it is something there's something valuable about the fact that it's in our lore. So even though we personally, I personally, you personally, may not have had that level of we have it in our rhetoric, in our mind, in our narrative, in our national narrative, that helps us very much to be conscious of it when we see it and to be able to respond in kind.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Joe Dweck. Thank you. And now we're going to go to the letters to Camondo with Edmund Duval.
Hello, Emily.
Hi, hello, Edmund. Lovely to see you. Dear friend, you begin each chapter as you reach across the generations to share the insights and understanding with a collector, Count Moise de Camondo. And first question, how do you pronounce this guy's name? Because I thought he's got this identity.
I don't know. Everyone gives me different interpretations. Moise. I call him friend, which is probably the easiest way of being in contact with this extraordinary man. So that's how I call him.
Friend. Well, maybe we will call him friend here in this little conversation. And the friend, he struggled against disorder, you write, and the dispersion of his people by creating this wondrous home filled with these French treasures. And you indicate a huge degree of empathy for this model French citizen who lived only a few doors from your own family before the war. And he was motivated in his collection and curation by a gift to his son Nissim, and later when the son Nissim died in World War I, as a memorial to his son. And I was wondering, as you spent time, you write, about being in the attic and sifting through these intimate archives of our friend's family life, what was going on in your relationship with him, almost related to him?
Well, for me, it was a very extraordinary and intimate experience because he was related to my his family, but the intimacy of this connection really was that I felt that this man who died in 1935 was trying desperately to pass something on. He was trying to create this house, trying to create this collection as a gift to France, because France had been so generous to his Jewish family, to the Camondo family. So he's creating this house, this collection, as a place of encounter for the generations to come, where people will come into this house and they'll understand his Frenchness, why they came to Paris, why the Camondo became Parisian. So I'm looking at this calibration of beautiful art that he does, and I make stuff, so it matters to me. So I'm looking at all this and talking to him about food and Proust and paintings and porcelain, of course, and all that stuff. But at the same time, I'm completely conscious that I'm also writing to him about what happens next. The fact that his only daughter and her husband and their children are deported and murdered in Auschwitz. And so that this house, this memorial for a lost son, becomes this strange, powerful place of unsettled, unresolved meaning about what memorial means. And that, of course, is something that is so profound. What are we encountering when we go to that place? What kind of witness does it give back to us? And so I'm trying to work out in my letters to this man about myself and about witness itself. And of course, we're using the word empathy all the time tonight. Let me use it. Empathy surely is not generalized. It is specific and granular and related to this person in this house, how this daughter sat there. It's wonderful people. Look closer, you said earlier on. Looking closer was the line you were using. That was what I was trying to do with these letters. Look closer, look again.
And when you did look closer, you said you were wrestling what it means to feel respect and to connect and to feel empathy for characters. I mean, the guys, you said, our friend, he died in 1935. Lots of his family were murdered not long afterwards. What conclusions did you come to personally? Because you had this such close personal connection for aesthetic reasons, familial reasons, and cultural reasons with what's happened to him.
So it's basically this is me in a very Jewish way, being totally unresolved and trying to in another book trying to work out who I am, and I actually at the end I quote Jean Amery, the extraordinary Austrian writer who for so many of us is a sort of lodestar of writers, where he writes, nothing is resolved, nothing is settled, remembering cannot become mere memory. So what I'm trying to do is not settle the case. This is a book of, and letters, of course, that's the point about letters is I only, when I published the damn thing, did I realize that, of course, he doesn't write back. It's a book full of silences because he doesn't write back. So it's me writing to him and he doesn't write back. So there's lots of unresolved stuff. There's lots of silences here, and also there's a lot of love, to be honest, for him and for his daughter.
And it's so interesting that you say that the unresolvedness is the purpose, it is the destination. That's a really beautiful thought. I would like now to bring on all our authors together. So that's Anne Seber and Nicole Krauss and Wendy Lower and Eshkol Nevo and Anir Baram. So if we're all on screen, that's fantastic. And as a group together, it's lovely to have you here as authors of these books together with us. And apologies again that Arthur Green is not able to join us. And I'm wondering together what you feel is the difference between the empathy you as an author feel for writing a book of fiction and writing a book of fact. And several of you have dabbled in both, and wondering what your thoughts are. And maybe I'll kick off with you, Edmund, because in a way, your book, it's all about fact, but there's also your imagining as you're communicating and writing these letters.
I mean, don't start with genre, because all of us between us, I don't think any of us would think about ourselves in terms of genre. I think we're all people who want to start again in terms of voice and place and certainly, I mean, I damn it, non-fiction. I mean, what a deadly thing to have on the back of a book. I'm hoping just to I'm hoping to. My God, I mean, I'm looking at all of you, and you're all people I love and respect. So I'm going to shut up in a second. But I'm hoping to be in a real space in Paris with a real family, and explore what that kind of encounter can mean. And in this case, it was through, in a different way, which was to write letters. But for all of us, we begin again with each book. And I'm not sure that genre is a terribly helpful way to frame anything. That's my halfpenny worth from London, and I'm also freezing here, so I'm going to.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. They're very good thoughts to bring to the table here. And I'm wondering, Anne, you've read some of the other books, is that correct, in this collection?
Well, I've certainly read Edmund. I'm fascinated by what he has to say, because writing a biography is difficult. Of course, you feel empathy, but I think a greater biographer than I said self-identity with your subject is the first crime of the biographer. So you have to keep that distance. However much I felt Ethel's pain, and I think a better way to describe it for me personally is just I feel a duty of care. I feel a responsibility. And of course, when I was a mother of 20-something, I felt the pain, but I couldn't possibly have written the book then. It's taken me 40 years, and it's just a mixture of the responsibility, the duty of care. Ethel didn't ask me to write this book. And so, you really feel you've got to show the empathy, but at some point keep a distance, because I deal in fact, not fiction, sadly.
And Wendy, I got a strong sense in your book that you felt a responsibility for this family, and for families in general, actually as a unit, to hear their voice as a family and communicate that. Is that right?
Yes, and I appreciated Edmund's comments too about kind of looking closer and trying to understand, in the case of his photograph, what that mother and child and children actually kind of, I couldn't get into their heads, obviously, but it was also part of my imagination of of understanding what they went through and trying to reveal to the readers that, you know, she's holding his hand, and the last photo, she's still holding his hand when they're actually in the pit. And it just, you know, that those loving relationships that were very much a part of how Jews had to respond to these horrible circumstances and this assault. And so my work in trying to find them was kind of genealogical. And it was a crazy endeavor because I only had about 450 names and about 1,000 were killed. And it wasn't a complete list. But as I was doing that and kind of reconstructing those family trees, I felt like it was this kind of active memorialization through research. But it was unresolved because I couldn't actually identify them. I did find another family, and it was, for me, kind of in some ways, you know, selfishly comforting. I did find this picture of this family that was also killed in that massacre. And for me, this was a moment of restoration, as far as not only these were victims in this massacre, but this is how they wanted to be portrayed. This is their choice in 1941, the kind of family photo what's left of it. So, you know, there were moments of deep empathy for my subjects. And also it was difficult in the case of the perpetrators to try to grapple with, to try to understand what brought them to that moment as well.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I'm sorry we don't have time to hear more of you, but I want to press on and get to announce the winners. And before we announce the main winner of this prize, we've got a little fun winner to announce, which is a member of the audience who wins my bookshelf over here. So I will open up this envelope and let you know that this winner is Nicole Kennedy. So you get to win all of those books, which is very exciting. We might even have a drum roll. But happy reading, and we'll be in touch to send you all the books. And now I'd like to bring the chair of the judges, Joseph Dweck, into the room with me. And it's a very, very special moment because we're going to announce the winner of the 2022 Wingate Prize. And I'm sure you're all excited to see who's won. And let me open this most important envelope of the evening. So, and the winner is, I will turn it over, delighted to announce that the winner is Nicole Krauss for To Be a Man. And I'd like now to hand over to the chair of the judges, Rabbi Joseph Dweck.
Thank you, Emily. And congratulations, Nicole. I can say certainly on behalf of all of the judges that the books on the short list were so excellent and so meaningful to all of us. One thing that we regularly said is that the books on the short list really stayed with all of us. Nicole, your book was just brilliant in its prose. It was a literary delight to read. We recognize that you brought classic issues, really major issues, you know, when I'm talking about men and women and their roles in life, in such new and creative ways. And what we also recognized was that sometimes issues can weigh down literature. Your literature, your writing lifted the issues. It was the centerpiece of your book, and it was really, really so moving to all of us to read. We were deeply moved by it. And it brought out some passion in us. So we came to the discussion, having read it, with a great deal of passion and excitement over it. And so it was yours. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Joe, and many, many congratulations from me, and in fact from all our other shortlisted authors who are all talking on our internal chat here to congratulate you too. It really is an exceptional shortlist this year, and you are a really, really worthy winner, because I think that these short stories are so rife with prickliness. They're so incisive and raw, and they draw you in with an intimacy that feels uncomfortable and yet also very compelling, with no easy answers. And the characters are thinking and feeling through this weight of geography, family, Jewishness, history, and always with a sort of hint of violence and disruption. And actually, I think it's quite unusual for a a short story collection to win, and I think that's incredibly exciting. And I'm wondering to ask you, Nicole, as an aficionado clearly of the short story form, what's the secret?
Well, first, thank you. I'm so touched, like truly, really moved, but by what Rabbi Dweck had to say, and I just feel so grateful to be among this wonderful list. I too have read a lot of these books and was just honored to be part of the group. So thank you so much for this. The question, what's the secret? I don't know. I think, I am, for the most part, a novelist, and this is my only, my first, I don't know if it'll be my only collection of short stories. And there's something to me thrilling about writing a short story, and that it's so compressed. And in a sense, I'm just like in a novel, I never know where I'm going, but I know that I have very little time to get to the end, and I have to land the end like an Olympic skater. So there's a kind of building of urgency, and I can't do a lot of things that I can do in a novel, obviously, in a short story. But I love that. I love the intensity of the form.
And do you feel that you want to unravel or get to know what's happened before or what happens afterwards, because there is this compactness which is inherent to the form?
Oh, I never think about that, ever. Is that strange? I never think about what happens before the story begins and after it ends. It's just sort of not part of my universe. It's entirely about the moment that's chosen to look at. And of course, somebody pointed this out to me the other day. I almost never write anything that takes place only in a moment. So even in the story, there's a lot of looking backwards and a lot of looking forward and sort of casting around. So I'm spinning a lot of temporal yarn in stories.
And do you feel that because of the form, you're having to work with a different discipline than when you're working with a novel?
Wow, that's a great question. I sadly feel like I grow wilder and less disciplined as I get older, unfortunately. So, and I think writing novels takes an enormous amount of discipline, because you have to hold something over so many years. You have to live with it and keep it alive. But yes, I suppose there's something. I'll tell you a secret, which is that a lot of these stories in this book were written with many years between the beginning and the end. So I would write the beginning, and then they would sort of lay there, and I would write a whole novel, and then something about them would call me back, and I would return to them. And I think there's something about my mind having worked out things under the surface of everything else during those years, or changed or grown as a person. But is it right to say that it takes a certain amount of discipline to give a piece of writing the time that it needs to come to a kind of fruition?
So do you think that it's your unconscious working through some of those issues during the time that you're not directly attending to that story?
I do. There's no real other explanation. I mean, I am a big believer in the kind of mysterious process of creativity. And I always feel like we're asked in this day and age to explain things to the point of boredom, and we can't explain why things happen the way they do always. And I do allow myself that as a writer, that not knowing, and I also feel that kind of surprise when something announces itself to me that I didn't know. But I think there's a big part of this where underneath thinking and working and sleeping and doing and growing and reading, that bits of again, I'll return to the idea of threads are being woven together, and that by the time I return to them again, that coupled with the fact that I've grown and had new experiences, I can see the shape much more clearly.
And when you're writing in that way, do you need to re-immerse yourself back into the story in order to be able to continue it and to continue to weave those threads?
Yeah, I guess I do. Sometimes I'll come back and I think, what, I wrote that? Really, like there's so much space between the person that I was when I started and then the person I am when I end that I've almost forgotten. But I think that I have to read it over again, and then I, of course, live with it. But I also will say that a lot of these stories were written kind of feverishly. So Many stories in the collection were written just for the collection. So there are a few that are very old. One that goes all the way back to just after 9/11, that's called Future Emergencies. But many of them were written and they were written with the kind of, I'm glad that Rabbi Dweck said passion. They were written with a kind of passion and intensity from beginning to end as well. So.
Brilliant. Well, many, many thanks, Nicole, and a very big congratulations to you and, of course, all the shortlisted authors. Well, just actually remains for me to say a few thanks to Michaela Bromberg and Roy and the JW3 team for the partnership and support for the Wingate Prize for tonight and, of course, throughout the year, for Enna Shrimpsley for doing the PR, and of course, our 4 brilliant judges for wading through over 70 books to find these jewels and be able to agree, because I know there was a lot of discussion without being able to do that face-to-face. And for all the shortlisted authors who were able to join us tonight, it's been such a privilege to have you share the thoughts about your books with us. And I really hope that you'll inspire our audience, everybody who's watching us today, to go and buy and read them. And lastly, a massive thanks to Juliet Simmons, who's directed the Wingate Prize this year and for many years, and with assistance from Rebecca King-Lasman and Judy Wildman. It was really a pleasure to share this evening with you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you're inspired to get reading. And now just a little bit of an extra treat to hear some other tips of what you might choose to go out and read next from our shortlisted authors. Thank you.
The most wonderful book I read last year, and out of many, it's Adam Nicholson's. And the book is The Sea is Not Made of Water. It's an extraordinary book about beginnings, about observation and curiosity by a marvellous writer. And really it's a book about thinking about where we belong in the world. So lots about belonging. Thank you.
The best Jewish book I've read this year is a book called Seekers of the Face, which is by my dear friend Melilla Helder Eshed, who also happens to be the person holding the camera for this video interview, just purely by coincidence. Seekers of the Face, published by Stanford University Press this year, and an amazing attempt to create a 21st century reading of a classical and seemingly obscure text and making it exciting and relevant for our day. So I recommend it highly.
But this book, other book that really captured my attention this past year was Taya Miles' lovely study of slavery through the material culture of an artifact. It's called All That She Carried, The Journey of Ashley Sack, a Black Family Keepsake. And in this case, the material culture of slavery as it is passed on through the family, through the inheritance of that object, is something that I could relate to as far as the history of the Holocaust and the importance of material culture there. But in this beautifully rendered history, very intimate history of the slavery experience, historian Taya Miles also emphasizes the importance of love, and that object was this kind of a vessel of love that was passed down.
So one of my favorite books that I read this year is a book by Mati Friedman, and it's called Who by Fire. It is coming out next month in March. And it's about a little known moment in history, but a beautiful moment in which Leonard Cohen came to Israel during the Yom Kippur War and began to tour with a very small group of musicians to play to the troops.
The best thing I've read this year, The Vixen by Francine Prose. It's a novel about the Ethel Rosenberg story. It's a great story, or satire, perhaps I should say, but I love it for the way it shows how a really important, resonant story responds both to fiction and to fact.